House Oversight Subcommittee on Corporate Subsidies and State Investments will come to order. Will the clerk please take attendance?
Chair Carra.
Here.
Representatives Green. Beerline. Here. Magella. Pohutsky. Here. Mr. Chair, you have 4 members present, a quorum.
Representative Beerline moves to approve the minutes of the August 27th meeting. Without objection, so ordered. So, update for everybody before we get started with our testimony today. I went out and toured the Mundy megasite yesterday from 10 a.m. until 8 p.m. I was joined by the Midwesterner. It was good to have them there to go through the process and get a local feeling of what's going on there in the Mundy megasite. And just to recap what I saw while we were there, we wanted to hear from the community as a whole. Last week we heard that they were 3-1 in support in the community, and so my thought was, well, I'm going to go down there and see for myself, is there actually that much support? And the results, just to summarize, we started in the city of Flint at 10 a.m., knocked on 50 houses. The vast majority of homeowners who were home had no idea what the Mundy megasite was. So they had no formulated opinion. They didn't know what was going on. Went to Burton, went to 25 houses there, went to 25 houses in Grand Blanc. There might have been a few more than that. And they also, very much so, similar reception. Most of them did not know what was going on in Mundy. That said, the few who did know and were aware in those first about 90 houses they were more in support than they were opposed. It was clear from the numbers that we saw that there was more support. However, the level of knowledge about the situation was substantially lighter than we saw later in the day when we got to Mundy. Basic concepts of bringing jobs to the community is a good thing, and that was largely the extent of their knowledge, knowing anything about potential environmental impact or traffic issues or what this would mean for the community at large, how much taxpayer assistance went into the project, wasn't so much on the forefront of their minds or their thoughts. They were just simply looking at the superficial level, it's jobs in the community. And once we went to Meyer, right there in Mundy Township, we talked to a lot of people in the parking lot. And they were, by that point, you could clearly tell, much more knowledgeable about the situation, and they were largely split. The people at Meyer were not all from Mundy Township. Some of them were from nearby townships, some were from the city, and it was about a 50-50 split at the Meyer parking lot. And once we went to Maple Creek Preserve, that's where things got more interesting. Learned a lot. Had seen the megasite finally in person for myself. It's a 2-mile by 1-mile rectangle and huge farm field. They're growing corn and soybeans on the plot there. And I would say roughly 85-90% of the area there is farmland, not industrial site look, but crops that are being prepared to be harvested this fall, and very usable land for putting food on our plates. And there is the one neighborhood of about 100 houses or so, Maple Creek Preserve, door knocked about half of the neighborhood there. And there were largely 3 answers. The majority, I would say, were opposed in Maple Creek Preserve. There were some who were supportive, and then there were some who didn't want to speak at all. And that was an interesting aspect that we saw, but predictable. They didn't want to comment, and they have reasons why. And the people who were supportive seemed to be supportive because they're getting big payouts for their houses, would be my thought. If you have a house that's worth $325,000 and you get to sell it for $600,000, that's enticing for a lot of people who are struggling to make ends meet at this point. So they understand the corruption that's gone on there. The community is well informed there about who's on the board for their HOA. The fact that 4 out of 5 of the members on the HOA don't live in Maple Creek Preserve, and they are involved in this megasite project. The people who have a vested interest and or a responsibility on trying to turn this plot of land into something different than it currently is, which will give a lot of money to the interest group who ends up receiving these private funds, or these public funds for private purposes, that is, stand to gain substantially, and it's their job to execute. That's what we're seeing, and they have overtaken the HOA board, and it has created dynamics there for sure. We then went to Flint Township, just north of Maple, there, which is on the north side of the mega site, and that was overwhelmingly opposed and informed. There was one guy was very interesting because he noticed his potential bias. He said, "Look, I understand this is in my backyard, and a lot of people, want the manufacturing to not be done in their backyard, so I have a potential bias from that." And so he felt a little bit as if he had a skewed perspective because he would be seeing that massive building, right down the street from where he lives. But he said, despite the fact that he has that bias, the level of corruption and the process that he's seen that's gone into this, he's opposed because of that as well. And I thought that was a really cool perspective because he recognized, hey, I may not want this because it's right in my backyard, but everything else that I've seen as well also tallies on top of that and is a reason why I'm opposed as well. A very informed individual from the community and a very formulated thought into his opposition. So that's a general feedback from the day. Just in conclusion, the church that was on the site there has been demolished just in the last week or two. So in terms of a big project beyond a house, there are about 50 houses that have been demolished so far. Those are the ones on the perimeter of the mega site, other than one, and that's because in Maple Creek Preserve they have recently been developing the current neighborhood and community there. Some houses 4 years old, 3 years old, 2, 1 year old. A lot of new development, including the one house that has been demolished is a house that was started to be built this year, and then they demolished it a couple months after they started building it. That's the house in Maple Creek Preserve that's already been demolished, and again, there's dozens of others along the perimeter of the mega site. I just wanted to give that feedback to the committee before we get started today. It is a very flat plot of land. That was one thing that I predicted correctly. I figured it'd be very flat. It is. It is very flat. There's a lot of good crops out there. I didn't know it'd be a lot of good crops. I thought it'd be this big industrial site bulldozed through. They've got this tiny little operation on the north side on Maple where they've got a little trailer. They've got a barn that's the size of a house. They've got about 3 trucks parked out there, a couple Caterpillars, and a propane tank, and they've got a little porta pot. So in terms of an industrial site, that's the behemoth industrial site that we have on the Mundy mega site as of today. With that, we'll turn it over to Vice Chair Green for a brief comment before we start with our testimony.
So it's interesting to note that you said they had a propane tank out there. So that's not even, is the area not primed with gas?
Well, so what I saw was through a black fence on the other side, so you could see the trucks over top of the black fence, and then it looked like there was like 1 or 2 propane tanks. That's the best of what I could see. It was blocked off, and it just said that no trespassing signs. So I saw what looked like a propane tank from, I'd say, 50 meters away from the roadside, and also right above that and those trucks, a project that has been riddled with secrecy isn't looking for secrecy there. They have surveillance cameras so that they can see everything that's going on in their little tiny industrial site there. So this whole process that's been kept under wraps as much as possible. They've got their cameras out there to spy on us and make sure that we're not going in there and investigating too much. So we saw what we could from the road, and we saw their little industrial site.
It's just interesting because I drive by it, and so you can kind of see a little bit of the area. But you are correct that, and you just confirmed what I always suspected, is that the area is not even like there's no infrastructure like water, sewer, gas at all in the vicinity. From what it sounds like.
From what I saw, it looked very untouched from what I could see to the eye. And on the other side of that fence is kind of like a see-through black. You could see through it still, and you could see the propane tank through that black screen on the fence there. And there wasn't much on the other side of that fence that was being done we would have been able to see it through the fence. So it was very minimal what has been done down there so far. With that, we will move on to our agenda today. We're going to start with hearing testimony on the Mundy megasite from James Homan, Director of Fiscal Policy for Mackinac Center. If you want to come forward when you're ready, looking forward to hearing your testimony.
Hello again, and thank you for having me. Committee members have been hearing a lot of testimony about this deal and about this site from a lot of diverse perspectives, and I just wanted to point out what I think ought to be the legislative takeaways from this experience of having SanDisk decide that they no longer wanted to build a series of chip fabricators in the state of Michigan. The first is just to notice how much incentives were talked about in this deal. There was $6 billion signed or included in the letter of intent, and that's not including all of the possible money that this company was going to get from the federal government. And what you should note is that of that $6 billion, only around $259 million of that had been authorized by law. $5.9 billion of that required new programs, new legislation, new appropriations from legislators. And so this was a state agency not administering what had already been approved in law, but rather agreeing to lobby on behalf of this private company for more. I don't believe that that is what our state economic development agency should be doing. It is legislators' job to establish economic development policy in the state of Michigan. Now you can ask the MEDC for their experience and guidance in crafting your economic development policy, but it should be your decision, and state agencies shouldn't be here to lobby on behalf of a private company. Now, the $6 billion database from Good Jobs First, which tracks these deals across the country, that would have been the fourth largest incentive package ever offered to a company, with only deals for Micron, Amazon, and Boeing exceeding the $6 billion amount. It is a large amount of subsidies, and very little of which was authorized by statute. But the other thing to note is that that letter of intent was confidential information. It was not disclosed until the company had already announced that it was no longer seeking to operate this project. I don't think we should be offering billions of dollars to secret companies and not telling people about who they're offering it to or how much our administrators have decided to offer these companies. That is a legislative choice. Now, some of the testimony from residents has been frustration that they didn't know what is going on with this deal. I think there's a legislative improvement that can be made. I've long recommended that before deals are entered, people have access to what is being agreed before it is agreed to so that they can voice their opinions. I think the legislation should be introduced that also covers things that aren't authorized by law yet. So these letters of intent, memorandums of understanding, or other agreements that the state makes ought to be public information before they're entered into. The other takeaway is just how many non-disclosure agreements are involved in these deals now. This is a growing trend in economic development, but it's not a good trend. Signing non-disclosure agreements doesn't ensure that the state gets a better deal for its incentives. It doesn't ensure that the deals are more economically beneficial to the state of Michigan. What it does is stymie the voice of opposition before deals are signed. That's a legislative decision that they can enter into these non-disclosure agreements, but that ought to be a policy that legislators reconsider, because I don't think this serves a public purpose. Legislators also ought to reconsider the structure of the site's preparation program. $259 million has been authorized for this deal, and that money is gone, regardless of whether any company locates on this site. Now, economic development administrators believe that someone is going to show up in this location, that money will not be wasted. But when you look at the structure of site preparation deals, it ensures that taxpayer costs happen regardless of whether there are any economic development purposes served later. There are no clawbacks on these deals. When you sign deals for site preparation money, ensure that taxpayer money is spent. And this taxpayer money is being spent specifically for someone's private benefit. These are private, profit-seeking companies who are looking to engage in trade, find mutually beneficial agreements, and come out ahead. It should not be the public's role in paying for their cost of development. This ought to be something that is simply the role for private investment. But while I think that's a question about the proper role of government, I think some legislators might have want to have a broader standard of whether site preparation makes sense or not. And one of those standards is the state going to come out ahead if it makes these site preparation deals? And if you look at the way that the program is structured, it's a very limited window that would allow for the state to actually profit from these deals, because in order for the state to come out ahead, a company has to locate on the site specifically because of all the work that the state has done. Otherwise, the company would likely show up at some other site in the state of Michigan. Another thing is that the company that chooses to locate in that site would also have to have no Michigan competitors. Otherwise, its gains might come at the loss of another Michigan company, and with the state kind of breaking even on those transactions. The company that locates in the site must actually meet expectations. As we've seen, the state has a terrible track record of turning job announcements into reality. And so therefore, site preparation ensures that there are costs, but the actual economic benefits are going to be uncertain. And then finally, the company that locates on the site also has to be subject to all of the state's taxes, rather than getting additional tax abatements that can last over a series of years, which ensures that the state does not get a return on its investment. So I think site preparation money ought to be under a much stricter scrutiny, and that if legislators take a little bit of skepticism towards the effects of these programs, they'll find out that it often comes out behind. Now, the other thing that I think legislators ought to consider is whether it's getting a good deal when it makes these types of deals. And I think whether it gets a good deal or not depends on the standards that you apply. And I talked about this in testimony before. So what standards ought to apply to economic development projects? And for this one in particular, I think you can do a simple cost benefit. The costs are how much money you're going to give to this company, and the benefits are how much economic activity the company provides. Now, if you look at the deal, the company was going to get around $2.2 billion in cash over the short term, with the rest in cash payments over the longer term. Now, $2.2 billion is a lot of money in the state budget. That's roughly 4.6% of the state spending from state resources in the current fiscal year. It's enough to run the Department of Corrections for an entire year. That is a substantial hit on the state budget. And the benefit that was proposed for this was 9,400 jobs over 10 years. Now, 9,400 jobs, nothing to sneer at. That's a lot of people's livelihoods. But in the grand scheme of Michigan's economy, that's 0.2% of current employment. And that's, again, to be added over 10 years. And that's overstating the economic effects of this project, because the state's economy is constantly turning over. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, we're creating and losing over 200,000 jobs every 3 months. And to put 9,400 jobs in addition over 10 years would simply not have a noticeable effect on the state's economic trends. In other words, this is a project that proposes to have a substantial effect on the state budget without having a substantial effect on the state economy. And I think the standard that legislators ought to have for its economic development programs, and I've heard legislators talk about these for decades, and I do think that they want to improve the state economy. They want to compete with other states, they want to win jobs, they want to have a material effect on the state economy when they're handing out these deals. But the way that these deals are being structured is that they'll have a substantial effect on the state budget without having those economic returns that legislators want. So if you look at this experience, I think there are some takeaways. Review access, allow people to have access before approval. Make sure that legislators and administrators can talk about what they're agreeing to with the public before deals are made. You should review the site selection or site preparation money, and you should try to establish a clear standard for what you want to accomplish with your economic development programs. I think if you can do any or all of those, we're going to come out ahead. We're going to learn some valuable lessons from this experience. Thank you, and I welcome any questions.
Thank you, James, for your testimony. One thing you mentioned was the $2.2 billion in the cash payments out of the gate, and that equates to 4.6% of the budget. To put that into context, yet we're seeing 0.2% of employment with the 9,400 jobs for the state of Michigan, and that's assuming they even hit their 9,400, because according to their track record, if they're closer to 10% of that, that'd be 0.02%, but we'll just give them the benefit of the doubt and say that will be the miraculous time that they actually come through with the jobs that they expected. 0.2% of employment and paying 4.6% of the budget, does that seem like a good investment to you?
So I believe some of you have mentioned like what else you can accomplish in the state budget for $2 billion, and I think that's again like an appropriate standard. So what's the opportunity cost? What else can we do with this money? I think there's some basic things that the state can accomplish that would have a stronger economic effect than handing it over to private profit-seeking companies in the hope that they will create jobs when the state has as you noted and as I've mentioned before, has a terrible track record of turning job announcements into actual jobs.
Good, yeah, and we'll start turning over to questions when committee members have any, but I'll ask you another one here. You recently wrote that the MEDC wouldn't have much to do if the legislature stopped approving corporate handouts. Is it safe to say that this private-public partnership is actually in a situation of waste, fraud, and abuse, or what is this?
Yes, so when you review the economic literature of the economists who use sophisticated methods to isolate the economic effects of selective incentive programs, sometimes they find positive effects. Most of the time they find negative effects, but they never find large effects. When legislators say they want to improve the state's economy by handing out select deals to select companies, they should know that the tools are not sufficient to accomplish the task that they want. And because of that, if lawmakers think that they're going to change the direction of the state economy by picking the right companies, writing the biggest checks to the biggest companies, they're simply not going to accomplish that task. And if they think that they are going to do that, then they are going to be wasting taxpayer money.
Looks like we have a question from Representative Bierlein.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for being here again. So I've always had questions on how we figure out, oftentimes when we're talking about economic development, there will be a multiplier. If we're going to create this many jobs, it's actually, there's a residual effect in the community of actually this many jobs. And that's a very debatable number. Does Mackinac Center have a number that they think is accurate? Like if you bring in 9,400 jobs, how does that trickle out into the community? Because I'm just doing the math on how much income taxes it's going to generate for the state over 10 years, and it's, I mean,
yeah. So
I need 100 years to recoup the $2 billion.
So I have on our site, it's a really interesting thing, which is the use of all the multiplier analyses there. And most of them are about spending multipliers, which is the state saying, look, if we spend $1 on rapid transit, it's going to generate $40 worth of economic benefits. But there are also employment multipliers as well. And I've talked with some of my economist friends about these things, and one of the basic problems that they have with these assessments is that they assume that the money just falls from the sky, which is if you model the economic multipliers, you also need to model the economic costs, which is to say that the multiplier assessments, if you use the same methods, you can find out which places you're going to have a bigger bang for the buck above alternative uses of spending. So it's not that if we give $1 to this company, it's going to create $3 worth of tax benefits. But rather you have to compare that to, okay, well, what happens if we build that money with, or build a road with that money that we otherwise would have spent. And that's the appropriate, like if you can use multiplier assessments to say, look, all things being equal, we can have a bigger economic effect for one type of spending versus the other. But often what these things are used to is to justify their existence in the first place, which is to say, look, if we give this company money, we're going to come out ahead. So did I get to
Yeah, so just to make sure that I'm clear, you know, we talk about the gardening method of how do we attract businesses, right? You have to have, you garden for them instead of hunt for them. So you have to have a good tax policy, you have to have energy policy, you need infrastructure in place. So when we're comparing these cash benefit to a $2.2 billion cash deal, and what will the economic output be from that, what we should also be looking at is if we spent that $2.2 billion in another place, what would also be the economic output of that?
Absolutely.
Okay. Yeah.
And you can do those assessments if you want to. I rarely see them done, but I think that would be a clever and sophisticated way of judging your economic development policy. Because if you have an economic development policy, it should have clear economic benefits above alternative uses of spending.
Thank you.
And what you two are talking about there is a clear example of looking at the opportunity cost. And you know, whether we're spending this money elsewhere, whether it's on roads or something else, or if we just look at these billions and billions of dollars that are coming from the taxpayers and say to ourselves, the 10 million different ways that money could have been spent if people had that money in their pockets, spent it elsewhere here, spent it elsewhere there, made market decisions of their own in a voluntary marketplace, in a free market, without confiscating their money for essentially planned private businesses' benefit. What type of economic output would we have gotten from those 10 million people spending their money as they saw fit instead of having it confiscated from them for this one specific project? If somebody wants to build this big megasite, more power to them. Build it yourself, sell your product, and make a profit. That's the American dream. And thank you for sharing the opportunity cost with us today. That was a good conversation. Moving on to another question I have is regarding the site prep and the scrutiny that's gone over the lack of transparency with this process. From what I saw down there, you know, the $250 million, it's unclear to me yet where they're getting this money to bulldoze houses in the church. My understanding would be it's probably from the SSRP $250 million. That's my best understanding. I haven't seen that confirmed yet, but I would like to know that answer. We might need some assistance. Maybe the MEDC will let us know. That would be nice if they can get back on that one. So I'll reach out to them to try to get confirmation. But what I saw when I was down there were a lot of people, far more NDAs signed than we had originally thought, because the homeowners are signing non-disclosure agreements. And it's not that they're part of this overall scheme, it's that they're subjected to this. And when people come to you and say, hey, you can sell your $325,000 house for $600,000, just sign this non-disclosure agreement and don't talk about your deal, or possibly even more. I'm hearing rumors that some people got over double of the market value for their house. And but you know, people had signed NDAs, so they were quite tight-lipped about it, but rumors get around and ultimately got to me going down there and talking to the community. And all of these NDAs are just further suppressing the knowledge that people have on this. Well, we have this $250 million being spent. Is it being spent on site preparation or buying out people's houses to bulldoze them? Some houses that are only a year or two old.
In this case, I think it's for both, but buying people's homes is probably the expensive thing. but I think you are right, is that if you are uncomfortable with the non-disclosure agreements that are being signed over these economic development deals, you can change the rules. That is in the legislature's possibility of saying that we don't want anyone, economic development officials or otherwise, signing non-disclosure agreements over economic development deals. I think that's legislation you can consider, and that ought to consider, because I don't think these non-disclosure agreements are serving a public purpose.
Thank you. Looks like we have a question from Minority Vice Chair Rogella.
Hi, thanks for being here. So I think well documented, me and the chair are on opposite sides of the political spectrum. I know that Good Jobs First is a left-leaning policy group, and Mackinac Center, at least in my opinion, is a right-leaning one. We've seen under both Republicans and Democrats in different administrations over the past 30 years continuing to do this kind of what they call economic development, what I would call corporate handouts. We've seen it over and over again. We haven't seen, in my view, the evidence that it's working. We've seen evidence that it hasn't. So my question is, even though there are people on both sides of the political spectrum who both approve and disapprove of these, I think your average person, you ask people, regular working class person, should we be giving tax dollars to multi-million and billion-dollar corporations? Their answer would be no. But why do you think this keeps happening? Why do these institutions of power continue to give public taxpayer money to private capital?
It's because businesses ask for it. I think that's the primary reason, is that business comes and say, look, we've got this facility, we're going to bring some jobs, you just need to give us some extra money. And I think legislators, policymakers make a political calculation and say this can be good, this can be bad. But I mean, as you saw from this case, the company asked for $6 billion, and at least its economic development administrators thought that was a good idea. It wasn't legislators coming up with these new programs, these new ideas. It was the business asking for something, and then having policymakers respond to the request.
And then my follow-up, has the Mackinac Center ever tracked donations from these companies to lawmakers? I just am curious if organizations have done that legwork to see what kind of influence that might be having.
Yeah, I think there have been a couple of papers on that subject, but we haven't covered that issue. And again, I think one of the reasons is that, as legislators, I'm going to have mostly good idea, like when you say you're doing this to, or when legislators say they're giving companies extra money, they really sound like they want to create jobs, they want to improve the state economy. I don't think it's because these companies have made enough campaign contributions, favors, or other things with all the legislators. Now, maybe that's not the case, but I do take legislators at their word that when they're making these deals, they are trying to improve the state economy. I just think it's a mistaken proposition.
Just thinking through the concept of somebody like the vice chair, self-proclaimed Democrat, socialist, hopefully I'd say that. That's different from central planning and or communism, right? It's more of a sharing the wealth concept, but not centrally planning and dictating and going away from at least some type of market decisions. And the way that we're taking money from the people and giving it to these big corporations, whether you look at it from more of that perspective or from a free market perspective, like would be more aligned with us, this whole process is just completely eroding basic supply and demand concepts. It seems like people from all spectrums of ideology can agree that this type of central planning is just simply redistributing wealth from the hardworking middle class to the politically connected. And like you said, businesses are asking for it, but I would say they're asking for it because they have a regulatory environment that's burdensome, unreliable infrastructure or energy grid, a workforce that may not be as well prepared as we should because our education process is struggling. And they're trying to find a way to make the dollars and cents work if they're going to build here in America. And when the big corporate interests can come in and can make their offers to, hey, we'll do it here in America if we get millions or billions of dollars in handouts, then we'll do it here. If you bribe us, then we'll work here. Wouldn't it be much nicer if we just had a business-friendly environment where not only these big corporations, but also the small businesses who are struggling because they're paying full tax rates to help subsidize these big corporations' special deals. And we all suffer because of it. And is this a reasonable depiction of what's going on here and why we need to stop this whole process?
Well, I want to go back to your comment about the ideology around this, because I don't think we have good constitutional principles that are cross-ideological about using the public sector to support private development. This is one of the reasons why our state constitution requires 2/3 approval in both chambers in order to sponsor a private or to give money to a private organization. And it's the legislature's job to try and figure out how to best serve the public's interest. I don't think that's an ideological statement. That's the structure of our state constitution. And legislators should be especially skeptical that taking money from some people and giving it to other private businesses serves the public interest.
Perfect. Well, thank you, James, for your testimony as always. Appreciate you coming in and having a conversation with us today. With that, we will move on to our next individual, which is Mr. John Messina, President of the Center of Economic Accountability. If you want to come up, John, when you're ready, looking forward to your testimony as always.
Thank you very much. I apologize if I'm still a little fuddled. I spent the past hour in traffic on 96, which was closed down after a massive accident. I declined to state how fast I drove after I got out of there on the off chance that the state police are somehow listening to me. So thank you, Chair Carra, Minority Vice Chair Regella. Thank you for having me here today. I am John Messina, President of the Center for Economic Accountability. We are a nonpartisan and independent 501c3 that's based here in Michigan, but works around the country to bring transparency, accountability, and free market-based reforms to state and local economic development programs across America. I should also say that while I'm here testifying today in that role at the CEA, I will note for full disclosure's sake that I'm also a senior fellow at the Reason Foundation, specializing in economic development policy, and hold similar contract fellowship roles at the Better Cities Project, ITR Foundation in Iowa, and Bluegrass Institute for Public Policy Solutions in Kentucky. Well, my testimony today does not represent the position of any of those organizations. It is a pleasure to be back here from this committee, and I'd like to reiterate my gratitude to Speaker Hall and House leadership for recognizing the pressing need for meaningful legislative oversight over Michigan's economic development programs in general and the Michigan Economic Development Corporation and Michigan Strategic Fund specifically. Since the last time I was here in May, Michigan's need for meaningful oversight of our state's economic development agencies has become front page news. It's also become clear just how much the MEDC and other agencies do not want inconvenient questions being asked about what they're doing with taxpayer dollars. And we see that based on how hard they've been willing to fight in order to keep those questions from being asked and answered. That's the context in which I'm here to talk to you today, and appropriately context is the sort of overriding theme of my testimony. And since everyone here knows from recent firsthand experience, the process of putting together Michigan's general fund budget involves a year's worth of arguments, negotiations, compromises, trade-offs, deals, late nights, early morning, everything else. And that is how it should be when you're planning how to spend $15 billion or so of taxpayers' money. And yet, this one project was, according to what the MEDC itself told you, on the line to receive almost $24 billion in subsidies between these $6 billion or so headline and then what the MEDC COO said was maybe 18 billion or so. Wasn't real clear on exactly the number, bigger than 15, smaller than a state budget. Going to just one project, one company without any meaningful version of the kind of transparency, accountability here that would go into spending less money than that in the general fund. And yes, as Mr. Messer of the MEDC testified to you, there was going to be up and down votes in the legislature. In fact, as my friend James Hellman noted, that they were going to have to create, you all were going to be asked to create entirely new subsidy programs in order to land this deal. That's not the same as having, being involved in an open negotiation, not the same as being presented with a done deal. That is the context that I was talking about. In context, that is an just inexplicable, indefensible, and frankly, it's an inhumane way to spend that much money. Vice Chair Royal at a recent hearing gave a couple examples of the kinds of things that could be spent, $6 billion could be spent on. I would note for context that if you look at it from the full $24 billion price tag of state and local incentives over the life of this deal, that's more than a year's worth of the school aid fund, $20.6 billion this year. Stop and think about that for a second. Is there anyone who can say with a straight face that one computer chip plant is worth more in economic development, to the prosperity of the state, to the future of Michigan, than an entire year's worth of education funding for every single public school child in Michigan? Of course you can't. And when you put the price tag for these deals in context like that, they make absolutely no sense. The last time I was in front of this committee, I noted the original $1.75 billion price tag for the Ford CATL Marshall plant was more than Lara had distributed in unemployment benefit checks in 2021. The state's economy was still coming out of the COVID recession. It was more than the state's entire general fund appropriations for public colleges and universities. Again, these are the decisions that we are being made. It is clear that by any meaningful calculation, these are not decisions being made in the public good, and I would argue that that is one reason why the public isn't doing so good right now. For decades, under administrations of both major parties, Michigan has been betting its economic future on these kinds of big-ticket, high-profile projects. Poll Town on down, we all know the list. Well, this has been going on for 40 years since the signing of the Michigan Strategic Fund Act. That future that we have been investing in is here, now, today. This is the future we were told about. It is a future of some of the worst unemployment in the country, a stagnant population, crumbling infrastructure, and some of the brain drain as our best and brightest leave to go to states where they can see a future for themselves and their families. And yet the MEDC and their cronies keep on coming back with bigger and bigger and bigger deals, promising that this time will be different. This deal will be the one to unlock prosperity, that a semiconductor plant outside Flint will somehow magically benefit the UP, as the MEDC testified. All we have to do is give this one company a whole lot of taxpayer money. The Mundy Township debacle can and should be the final piece of evidence this legislature needs to formally recognize what's been clear to the average Michigan taxpayer for years, that the Michigan Economic Development Corporation, Michigan Strategic Fund, and the state's other economic development agencies are not getting the job done. There's a variety of reasons for this, many of which has been talked about. James was talking about some of them, ranging from who is in charge to how they're held accountable to how some of these ROI calculations that were being talked about earlier, I would say, bear as much relationship to economics as horoscopes do to astrophysics. But in light of what this committee's learned about Mundy Township, about Goshen, about Ford and CATL and Marshall, about General Motors and LG and Lansing, Global Link International, over and over and over again, the whole litany of names, the time has come for this legislature to take action. Fundamentally, I would encourage this legislature to revisit the Michigan Strategic Fund Act of 1984 and consider what kind of role Canada should be playing in the modern economy a quarter of the way through the 21st century. That act was drafted at a time when we understood far less about the limitations of central economic planning and government intervention in the economy than we do today. Those of us who are a bit older remember the national narrative that at that time, that Japan's government-managed industrial policy would end up with Japan Inc., as Time magazine famously called it, owning everything worth owning in the United States. What actually happened there, to some of the Chair Carra's discussions about the free market, should be a cautionary tale. Japan ran their economy with their Ministry of International Trade and Industry as sort of a national equivalent of the MEDC on steroids, And there was a short-term boom, and then the long-term result is what is now known in Japan as the lost decades. Between 1995 and 2024, Japan's share of the global economy fell from almost 18% to less than 4%. In 1990, Japan had a higher GDP per capita than the United States. Today, ours is more than twice theirs. You heard Mr. Messer of the MDC talk a lot about we have these economic development plans. We have a lot of economic development strategies. Well, if you look at the history of economic development plans and strategies, they don't really work all that often. There's not a lot of places you can look at and say, this is where this worked. The MDC was created part reaction to the fear that we would lose the auto industry to Japan, and to avoid that we needed to compete with them at their own central planning game. Despite decades of evidence that the governments are really, really bad at micromanaging economies, we're still trying it over and over again, expecting different results. That is famously the definition of insanity. So I would like to sort of close here by making 3 specific suggestions to discuss. One, I would echo my friend James Homan in suggesting that it is time for this legislature to ban the signing of non-disclosure agreements by state or local elected or appointed officials when it comes to economic development deals. You heard about the toxic roles those played in Mundy Township. You got to talk to people in Marshall on the same issues. Michigan's FOIA laws are already some of the worst in the country. We cannot afford to have government officials signing away the remaining shreds of the public's right to know when it comes about what's planned for their communities. Second, I would suggest that it's time to revisit the statutory makeup of the MEDC and MSF boards. You look at them and they are made up of real estate developers, corporate interests, their cronies. It is long past time for these bodies to have at least one person on them who is skeptical, who is evidence-based, who maybe is economically minded. I think a lot of issues might be avoided to begin with if there was at least one person there they knew would be asking inconvenient questions. And third and finally, I'd like to quote Attorney General Nessel's suggestion last month that, quote, "Until there's better oversight, perhaps they shouldn't be receiving any state funds at all," unquote. And until this legislature is satisfied that the MEDC is operating in a transparent and accountable manner, it's time to take the taxpayers' checkbook away from them. And I'm sure that we would hear all sorts of doom and gloom predictions about what might happen, but in reality, what's the worst that could happen? Would we end up with some of the worst unemployment in the country? Could we end up stagnating as a state? I mean, that's where we are now. That's where we got to this point. That is the future we're in. A different future is going to mean doing things differently, and lesson of the Mundy megasite and other deals is that we need to be doing things differently than they are. Thank you. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, John. And you're right, these type of market decisions and economic development are what we would call corporate welfare or corporate handouts. This is what we've had in Michigan, and our economy is where it is. So this is what they have to stand behind. This is what they've created. Are they proud of themselves? And then they create this committee. The governor wants to investigate why people are moving out of Michigan. How about we quit doing these plans and actually get back to the basics of free enterprise? We don't need a committee. Let's just quit centrally planning. Would that make more sense?
It would, and I would add to that to some extent, these programs allow elected officials and appointed officials to sort of dodge the hard questions and to avoid doing the hard work of actually grappling with often very fundamental issues of things like education and housing policy and all tax policy and all sorts of things that really truly do go into the decisions that companies make about where to build and what either encourages or discourages good businesses that create good jobs. It's a lot easier to go stand up at the ribbon cutting or groundbreaking ceremony and smile, put your name, make sure that your name is on the barrier fence graphics, than it is to actually sit down, roll up the sleeves to do that. And in the absence of these programs, voters and taxpayers might well be able to ask some harder questions and demand some better responses from their elected officials.
When the Midwesterner and I went down to the Mundy mega site yesterday and we're talking with the locals, we heard clarification on a lot of things. And one thing we heard from the community was frustration about how 4 out of the 5 board members for the HOA for Maple Creek Preserve are people who don't even live in Maple Creek Preserve and who are heavily involved in this megasite production. Is that something that you see as an issue with this process?
Yeah, absolutely, and I'm not, all I've seen is reporting on that. I'm certainly not personally familiar with the details, but that kind of, cronyism, that kind of decision to sort of try to get around the guardrails or to take control of what should be the guardrails. I mean, the ultimate example of that is, again, as we've seen through recent reporting, the MEDC and Michigan Strategic Fund boards themselves. I mean, the MEDC is supposed to be the entity in this entire process that is sort of that sharp penciled, green eye shaded, diligent protector of taxpayer dollars, of the public interest, of the public good. They're the ones that are supposed to be holding everyone accountable. And what we've been seeing very clearly, we've known for years and now we're seeing it more and more so, that they are unwilling to themselves be held accountable and do very little. There was just reporting yesterday out of Bridge, Michigan, that the members of the MSF board had been failing to complete something as fundamental as a conflict of interest disclosure form on a regular basis for many years.
They seem to be more of the sharp tool that's stabbing everybody in the back as it's taking their taxpayers' money for their special interest group friends who they're redistributing it to. And to put it in context here, with the $24 billion divided by 10 million people, that is $2,400 per person for context. Now, a lot of that is local tax abatements, but the $6 billion that's from the state, if you just look at that $6 billion and divide that by 10 million people, that is $600 from every man, woman, and child on average. From a family of 5, that's $3,000. Do you think a family of 5 would rather help be a partner in the creation of this microchip plant for a private purpose in the Mundy Township, or do you think they'd rather have that money in their pocket to spend as they see fit?
I mean, I think I think the answer is self-evident, but I think it's very clear that when there's polling, people are generally in favor of economic development programs, but not at the expense of anything else. That when you ask the questions, when you do the polls, what we find is that yes, people like the idea of going out and attracting big businesses and attracting projects and creating jobs. Then you say, well, would you rather spend money on that or on education or roads or healthcare or virtually anything else under the sun? There is the place where basically the last people would like to be spending that money is on this, and much more so on other issues that frankly the evidence tells us would do more to actually improve the state's economy than trying to subsidize one big company. Fixing the roads would do more economically because infrastructure quality is a higher, if you look at the state site selection industry's own research, infrastructure quality often usually ranks higher than state and local incentives in terms of what actually goes into site selectors' decision at any given time.
Let's see, we have a question from Representative Beerline.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So as we're looking as policymakers to change things or to, the next iteration of whatever we're going to do economic development wise, are there some examples we should be looking to? Are there states that are, in your opinion, really getting this right that should be models for other people?
I hesitate to say no. I mean, the states that are doing it best are the ones who just sort of aren't doing it. There are not that many, but there are states that are much less active in this game for one reason or another. And there are states that do it, I think, arguably worse than Michigan. Louisiana comes to mind in terms of per capita spending, other places like that. There are states that do better job with transparency. There are states that do better jobs with accountability. One way to do it better is the states that just do this through a straight state agency and don't have sort of the corporation or whatever methodology that we have with the MEDC, because that gets rid of opportunities for all sorts of games being played with FOIA, with executive compensation, with all sorts of things. Part of the reason I'm not giving you a good answer here is because it's a 50 states, it's very difficult to do. We have tried to look at the state by state basis in terms of how many jobs different states claim to have created, how much money they spent in the process. Michigan is one of the worst. I think that, you know, one of the simplest ways to get better at it would be, like I said, just to do less of it, and then to really get serious about the transparency that lets us answer those questions more differently. Without transparency, it's very difficult to actually have any meaningful accountability.
Thank you.
So you mentioned the $24 billion earlier between the local tax abatements and the state funding. When we heard from the MEDC last year, there was also the federal funding between the CHIPS Act and the additional $13 billion for a total of $16 billion or potentially a little bit more. When you add the state and local plus the federal funding, that gets you up to $40 billion. And something that struck me with that 40 number is the cost to demolish the elementary school on that site would be about $40 million to build a new elementary school. So that's 1/1000th of the overall cost, is destroying an entirely perfectly fine elementary school and rebuilding it somewhere else. And do you think that the elementary school being relocated is something that should be exciting for the people of Mundy Township?
I would think that the destruction of homes and communities and sort of the existing way of life is probably not going to be exciting at all. I mean, obviously some people, as you said, will profit, others will cost people to pay their homes, and that this is a situation that we see all the time over and over again, where there are people for whom this will be in their best interest, and there are a whole lot more for whom it will be against their best interest. But the people who tend to have any actual power in the situation, whether they are on the board or whether they're members of an HOA or whether they're selling their homes for 2, 3, however many times market value, they actually have power versus the average person, the average citizen, has little to no power other than maybe their vote at the ballot box. I mean, we talked about the political implications of this, and Representative Legell actually asked the question. I can actually sort of answer one of his questions belatedly. He asked about like research on the political implications, and I'm happy to share a link to it later. Paper last year from professors at Penn State and Georgetown in the Journal of Law and Economics, finding that state governments allocate economic incentive awards disproportionately to firms that are politically connected to state politicians. Connected firms more than 3 times more likely to receive an incentive award, and the award amount is 51% higher. They also found that unconnected businesses actually do a better job at job creation than the connected ones, and I'm happy to share a link to that study. There's been a great amount of research finding that these decisions are being made for much more political than economic reasons.
We heard last week from proponents of the megasite that this is site ready, that this is the best site in America. There are currently hundreds of houses on this site, an elementary school, and a recently demolished church. And we have crops that are still growing, as of yesterday, out in the field. Does this sound like it's site ready to you?
No, having listened to that testimony, the words "best site in America" are burned into my ears, I believe. But from my perspective, if you have something that is the best in America, if you have the best site in America, that is an asset that you should be asking to be compensated for, not something that you should then have to pay somebody 6, 18, 24, 40, however many we end up deciding it is, $1 billion to take off your hands. The Strategic Site Readiness Program, it was maybe the most recent in the long string of sort of knee-jerk public policy decisions that, frankly, this legislature has made. Every time something goes someplace else, there's a panic, and they say to the company, well, why didn't you come here? And whatever junior person at the company is responsible for sort of answering that for everybody who asks them, they come up with some standard response. Oh, you didn't have mass transit. Oh, you didn't have a ready site or something like that. When that happened with Amazon, that's how we ended up with the late and implemented Good Jobs for Michigan program. Should I take that? Amazon, Foxconn was Good Jobs for Michigan. Amazon became the Regional Transit Authority legislation that got voted down first time by the voters of southeastern Michigan. The battery plants in Tennessee and Kentucky got us the Strategic Site Readiness Program. Every time a company says, well, we didn't have this, and we have no idea to what degree they're actually telling the truth or not, frankly, it wouldn't be necessarily in their best interest to truly tell us the truth, because that would be proprietary. We come up with some program, some new subsidy deal, some new way of handing money to companies so that the next time they'll pick us. And as I said, it's been 40 years and that hasn't worked yet. We might want to try it someplace else. So, no, that does not, Mr. Chair, sound like a site, development-ready site. It does, whether or not it's the best site in America. If it is, that doesn't say much for America's sites. I guess I've driven through a lot of this country. There's a lot of open land. If you need to knock down churches, that doesn't seem like necessarily the best idea. And the entire idea that we should be the ones, taxpayers should be the ones footing the bill, and then bribing people on top of that to go to that site, makes me ask the question of, well, how good is that? Why bother doing that if we need to pay to take people to use it anyways?
You mentioned earlier how the Attorney General had made a comment that potentially we shouldn't be funding the MEDC at all during this controversy that they're riddled with. What are your thoughts on simply abolishing the MEDC altogether?
I'd be 100% in favor of it. My policy suggestions earlier were sort of more in the incremental things that I thought were maybe within the Overton window of the politically possible. My organization's policy is that just economic development agencies, in the sense of agencies that go around handing out subsidies, incentives, shouldn't exist, that there is little to no economic value to doing so, and that the costs in terms of civil society, opportunity costs, potential for corruption. I mean, this legislature and virtually every legislature around the country has created a situation where giant sums of money are changing hands between government and business behind closed doors, but we're being assured by everyone involved that the reason for doing so is that they're making those decisions and they're negotiating those deals in our best interest, in the taxpayers' best interest. It's not people at the table, but everybody at the table only has the public's best interest in mind.
They can't tell us about it.
They can't. They're certainly not willing to tell us about it, or even, I guess, fill out their conflict of interest forms to let us know when they personally might be profiting or not. And I don't want to try to attribute sort of nefarious intent to everyone involved in the process. I spent many years before I ever got into the public policy world behind the scenes of a lot of these deals, and I saw how they got made. But nothing I saw during those times, makes me think that the way we talk about them here today now about the problems are any less true. That is the way that the sausage gets made, I guess, would be the way to say it.
Very good. Next question from Minority Vice Chair Wigella.
So, I'm someone who believes that, we should be organizing our society in the most democratic way possible. I believe that our economy should be organized democratically, where workers have a say in their workplaces and then have a share of the profits they create. I believe our government should be as democratic as possible. I think what we're seeing happen with these deals is the most perverse form of oligarchy and crony capitalism that we can see, right? We have politically connected folks donating to the right people and coming to the state and asking for essentially large sums of public money so that their profits can be increased. Because the reality is a for-profit corporation under a system of capitalism has one interest at mind, and it is how much money they can make. They will never have the interests of the community at heart unless it benefits their bottom line. That being said, when we come up with these deals that are structured in a way that there's $6 billion of state money, huge sums of local dollars and federal dollars totaling $40 billion, we are effectively saying, as lawmakers, if we were to have made this decision, luckily we didn't, you can't have taxpayer-funded universal child care or health care or funded roads and schools, but we're not blinking an eye in a lot of situations to giving these profits to these for-profit corporations. So my question is, would even the Mackinac Center, which is a right-leaning center, agree that doing things the way we're doing them now versus some of the things I talked about with roads and healthcare, that would even be preferable to the Mackinac Center than just giving these to large corporations?
I can't speak for the Mackinac Center.
Or what would you say?
The Center for Economic Accountability. We are a free market limited government organization. And we do, personally, I think you and I diverge quite a bit on the proper role of government in that regard. But we do share, and I think the last time I was here, I quoted Dr. Martin Luther King's line about, in America we have socialism for the rich and rugged free market capitalism for the poor, and I think that this is a perfect example of that. This is a situation where, I say all the time, this isn't a right versus left issue. This is an us versus them issue, and in that fight, I know whose side I'm on, and I believe that you've demonstrated that you are on the same side as the other members of this committee. That the idea, we've talked about Good Jobs First, the left-leaning organization, good friends of ours, and when I launched the Center for Economic Accountability a bit more than 5 years ago, Greg Leroy, who runs Good Jobs First, was one of the first people I called to let him know that I was doing this, that he had a new ally in the fight, sort of from the more sort of center-right side of things. And what he said to me, I think, sort of encapsulates the question you're asking. He said, welcome to the fight. We'll get the money back from the bastards, then we can fight about what to do with it. That would be the thing. Our organization's remit stops at sort of getting the money back. What then happens with it, whether it is returned to taxpayers, which would be generally our sort of suggestion that this just not be taken from taxpayers in the first place, and that the market be allowed to function, or whether it be reallocated by the legislature to whatever other needs that it feels to be worthwhile and constitutional. That's to some extent out of our hands, but I do think that, to the larger point, that this is not an issue that is one that breaks along partisan lines, and I think that makes it both dangerous at times when you have situations where folks who otherwise might be hammering prongs. It's one of the few places we can get like regular bipartisanship, is folks standing up at the ribbon cutting and groundbreaking ceremonies. But it also means that there's bipartisan coalitions to try to fix it, to try to make it better, where people of principle come together and try to say that we could just see this isn't working. We know in our gut this isn't right, that the way things are going now, it doesn't work, and it's not what we should be doing. It's not a good way to be trying to use people's money or to run our state. And sort of the rest is basically details after that point.
Thank you. I looked at getting that money back and having that fight with you.
Greg Leroy's line. He's been doing that a lot longer than I have, even if he and I don't agree on a lot of other things in this world. But on this, we're absolutely in lockstep. He should be given a lot of credit for a lot of great work that Good Jobs First does.
In going through the numbers from earlier, the MEDC seems to have negotiated beyond their proper scope. Of course, I'd have issue with the $250 million as it was, but that money was appropriated, whether right or wrong. But they're negotiating beyond what's already been approved by the legislature and trying to come up with deals with a private company that would first need legislative approval before some of these tax incentives and or handouts would be given to the company to try to bribe them to come to Michigan. Do you see a problem with that specific element of the MEDC overstepping their bounds and negotiating with money that the legislature hasn't even approved?
Oh, absolutely. 100% that was it goes beyond red flag, maybe to red banners, if Representative Legell perks up with that metaphor of red banners waving above the state. I think it goes to sort of some of the institutional issues with the MEDC and the Michigan Strategic Fund, and who they view as sort of their constituents, their clients. They truly do seem to act as if they are working on behalf of essentially big business. That is the folks that they spend their time working for, talking to, lobbying the legislature on behalf of. I mean, we have, there are plenty of business lobbying groups out there who are more than happy to come to this legislature and ask for special deals for big business. I mean, that's essentially the reason that Business Leaders for Michigan was created, because the Michigan Chamber of Commerce had a momentary attack of fiscal conservatism and opposed subsidies for a while. The idea that they would, with a specific company, say, come to us and we will make sure that new laws get passed to give you even more money than the legislature has sort of empowered us with. With one hand, Mr. Besser, who, with all due respect, I like him personally. I think that he truly does. I believe that he believes he's got the best interests of the state in mind. But at the same time, he can't sit there on one hand and sort of, during his testimony to this committee in the most recent hearing, sort of be saying like, oh, we are, we're just doing, we're following the rule the legislature set out for us, and it's the Michigan Strategic Fund Act that tells us what to do, and all these, or you're using the programs that we have, and sort of like, well, if you want change, then just change the law, was sort of the subtext as I heard it of his testimony, while at the same time promising entire laws to somebody that this legislature had not passed or taken up or discussed. You can't have both. Either you're just sort of doing the bidding of the legislature and following the law, or you're out there, freelancing, and it's one or the other. And I think it's pretty clear from the Mundy Township story what is actually happening out there.
Well, thank you, John, for your testimony. I appreciate having you in as always.
Thank you very much.
Seeing no further questions, and there being no further business before the committee will stand adjourned.
John used to work for the Mac I know. No, I just apologize. But what's the yeah. I'm pretty sure I've been in a meeting.
So if you don't ask any questions at the organ today, you don't make any mistakes.
That's all right. I don't think it's that big of a mistake considering I do all their stuff together anyway. I don't think there's too many points of disagreement between them. Hey, if you're not making mistakes, you're not trying to.
That's right. And I appreciate it.
Mistake not made is a lesson.
Good line of questions always.
In my defense, you used to work for them.
Yes, that's fair enough.
In my defense, you used to work for them.
No, I know. That's not a problem. I'm sorry. No. I just wanted to make sure that I wasn't. I'm happy to send you if you want. I can send you. There's actually a couple of them along those lines I could share. I've written it up in various places before, but it's like there's. My favorite is one from researchers at Princeton, Columbia, who found that a state where a governor is running for re-election, if they